Hi, welcome everybody to this Exploring PhD Pathways panel. My name is Jenny. I am the Secretary for Edinburgh University Women in STEM. So for anyone who's new to Edinburgh University Women in STEM or to this Women in STEM Connect series, we have organised weekly Zoom calls over summer focusing on different topics. We've been discussing recent events and been using this platform as an opportunity to broaden the Edinburgh University Women's STEM network across the globe to different students, alumni and professionals. So we've had a successful networking event. We had the editathon last week as well. So Edinburgh University, we aim to promote and connect women in STEM through engaging with a wide range of successful individuals. We allow networking, new career opportunities, and basically to make friends with like-minded people. So you can follow us on social media, and we've also set up a new YouTube channel over the summer to record all these new events. So this event will be recorded and we will be uploading it to YouTube hopefully, and our other social media channels. If you're not comfortable with that, just send me a message and I'll get out from that. If you encounter any technical difficulties, just send me a message as well. And so basically today's event is focused on the PhD panel. So I'll be handing this over to Katie and Elizabeth, who will be hosting that.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie and I'm currently a third-year pot design engineering student at the University of Glasgow. And this year I'm a networking convener for FemEng, which is the Female Engineering Society at the University of Glasgow. We basically have very similar aims to Edinburgh University Women in STEM. And my role as a networking convener is to basically host events very similar to this throughout the year, hopefully in person, but who knows with COVID-19. And so I contact industry professionals to come and speak to the students and present. So that's a bit about me. Elizabeth, do you want to?
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I was the founding president of the Edinburgh University Women in STEM Society. So I've been working alongside the incoming committee to organize these events, which has been really nice and special to see the society and how much it's grown since then. And I graduated from the University of Edinburgh in 2019 with my Master's of Chemistry.
Perfect. So we have three panelists with us here today. So do you mind all quickly just doing a quick introduction about yourself and telling us who you are and what you currently do?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, go for it. Perfect.
Hi everyone. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Hi everyone. I'm Áine. I'm a sort of 3rd/4th year Planetary Science PhD student at the University of Glasgow. So my research focuses on searching for organic molecules in Martian meteorites. So these are rocks from Mars. My PhD is mostly geoscience based, but my undergraduate degree was in astrophysics. And in between my undergrad and my PhD, I actually spent 3 years teaching high school physics and astronomy. So feel free to ask me stuff about teaching, postgrad life, all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, so I guess if we're going in the photo order, I'll go next. So hi everyone, I'm Agne and I graduated from the University of Edinburgh last year with a degree with MPhil degree in astrophysics. And currently I am, I guess technically first year PhD student at Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics in Munich in Germany. And my research kind of focuses on looking at galaxy shapes and spatial distribution and trying to use that to determine the properties of the universe. So like how dense it is, how fast it's expanding, etc., etc. Yeah.
Great, and Heather?
Hi, my name's Heather. I'm a graduate student at the University of California, Los Angeles in Los Angeles, California in the US. I am going into my 5th year here. And I'll be around for probably another year and a half, 2 years before I graduate. I double majored in Earth and Environmental Sciences and Environmental Studies in undergrad with minors in Geology and History. And then a lot of my undergraduate research was in environmental policy. And then I took a year off, worked in a lab, did some field work, and applied to graduate school. And I've been here since.
Amazing. Well, thank you. They all sound very interesting. And first of all, thank you to everyone for showing up. It's great to see such a great turnout. And I'll kick it off with the first question. So I think it'll be a lot more people will be considering applying for postgraduate degrees and PhDs post the pandemic, just because the job market's really difficult at the moment. So can you all just explain quickly what the application process for your PhD was like and who you relied on for support during that time?
Do you want me to start again?
Yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's quite different university to university and indeed country to country. So I applied just for 2 PhDs and both were fairly similar in that it was a kind of CV sort of thing, or resume, I guess, in the States, plus sort of personal statement. And both the PhDs I applied for were projects that were already designed. So I didn't need to come up with a kind of research idea. You just had to show your understanding of it. Both the PhDs I applied for were to work with Martian meteorites, and my undergraduate thesis was on Martian meteorites as well. So it was mainly a case of, okay, how do I show what I did before is similar to the projects that I'm applying for, and other things I'd done in terms of the fact that I'd spent 3 years teaching since. It was kind of, okay, how can I draw on those experiences to demonstrate why it would help me do a PhD? In terms of support, well, I think the main thing I'd say was I was actually planning on going back and doing a master's, and I got back in touch with my undergraduate lecturers and said to them, look, I want to come back to university. I was thinking about doing a research master's, and they said to me, actually, you had a really good bachelor's degree, and I did have a postgrad, but it was in like teaching physics rather than in research. And they said, look, people who've got some work experience without a master's but with a good undergrad degree, it's seen as just as good to a lot of PhD places, certainly in the UK. I can't speak for every university everywhere else. And I hadn't even anticipated that. I didn't know you could do a PhD without a master's in the subject. So that's the main thing I would say is build relationships with people who are a bit ahead of you. So for instance, us who are on the panel here today, and any of your own lecturers and things like that, because unless you know someone directly who's had the sort of path you have, you're never going to know that actually there are lots of different ways. And ask loads of questions, put yourself out there, and just find out what the sort of people are that are useful. Oh, my other thing I found was I only actually applied for projects where when I'd emailed the supervisor first of all, they responded to me. So there were lots I saw that were interesting, that were advertised, but the supervisor and never got a response. I didn't bother applying because I would not have wanted to have worked with someone who didn't have the time to send a quick email saying, hello, I'm glad you're interested, here's my answers to your questions. I didn't want to work in a lab with people who didn't have time for applicants. So yeah, that's my answer.
Great, thank you. I think that last bit's really important and really great advice for people. Agne, do you have any? Do you want to talk about your application process quickly and how you found that?
Yeah, sure. So I think my application process was quite similar in terms of you also had like a CV, a motivational letter sort of thing, and you had to answer a couple of questions of just what you're interested in general. But I think the difference in my case was that I think I applied to 2 PhDs in Europe, well, mainland Europe and 1 in UK. And in the Europe cases, you weren't necessarily applying for a particular project even. So I was allowed to just say, I'm interested in this, in this area, roughly. But I think, at least coming to the actual interviews, it did seem that most of people who were invited for the interview had contacted a specific supervisor and had actually looked for a project. So even if the application itself doesn't necessarily pressure you to have any kind of specific project that you're interested in just yet, it really helps to even just have a couple, even if you, so in my cases and during the interviews, there were lots of presentations of the projects available. And if you find something that that interests you, that you hadn't applied already in your application, you can still meet those people, you can still talk to them, but just to get in, it is very, very helpful to actually have quite a specific idea of what you're looking for in that particular university or institute that you're applying for. So I guess that would be my advice. But also what I found quite interesting, at least for the institute here, was that some of the PhD students hadn't even done, or I don't know, that's maybe a bit, hadn't necessarily done a relevant master's or a bachelor's project, or not, you know, it would be slightly different. Like they had done a master's in quantum physics, but now they're doing cosmology, and they have to learn all of the kind of astrophysics and cosmology stuff already after they started their PhD. So that's another thing that it doesn't, even if you think that, oh, maybe I'm not quite qualified for this, as long as you put in the work and you're interested in that area, it's still possible to get a project that you want, I think.
Amazing, thank you. And lastly, Heather?
Yeah, so the application process in the US is like similar to what it's like in Europe and the UK. I guess the big difference is it's expensive in the US to apply to graduate school. I don't know how much it costs to apply in the UK and Europe, but here it costs between about a $50 and $100 something for each application that you send. In addition, you have to take the GRE, although that is being very quickly gotten rid of. But when I applied, we had to take the GRE, which I think was like $200 each time you take the test. And then you have to, there's a certain number of schools that you can send your scores to during the exam. But then if you want to send them later, you also have to pay a certain amount of money to have your scores sent out. And so there's that. And then depending on your university, some schools make you pay to send your transcripts to other universities. So I didn't calculate how much I spent applying to graduate school because I didn't want to see that number. But it can be very expensive. At the same time, there are, like, programs will give fee waivers as well. So like the cost shouldn't be a hindrance to applying. In the US, it's because our programs are, I think, a bit longer than they are elsewhere. So I didn't apply to a specific project. As previous panelists have said, I made sure to only apply with people who had responded to my email in like a positive way. So like, yeah, we would be interested. Like, we would like to hear more from you. Not like either no response or like we're not accepting anyone, or emails that were like kind of funky, like people who are like, you're going to be required to get all of your own research funding. I was like, that's not, I'm a 23-year-old like person coming out with a bachelor's degree. Like, I'm not going to be able to get all of my own research funding. So yeah, I only applied with people who I kind of like had some kind of connection with. With that, in the US, we don't, so sometimes there are interviews. I Skyped with several of the people I applied with beforehand. And then I would get my acceptance letter and they would fly me to wherever for like a campus visit. So there was that. And then in terms of people who I relied on for support, I had friends during the application process. I talked to my instructors a lot, like every single or several of my instructors. I was just kind of obnoxious and would like have meetings with them constantly about like where I should go, what I should look for, because I'm the first person in my family to go to graduate school. So there were a lot of things that I was very confused by. And then lastly, so in the US, you oftentimes don't come in with a specific project. Some faculty members will like kind of assign you a project, but it's a kind of a different system than it is elsewhere. So I applied to do something with tectonics, geomorphology, thermochronology, stuff like that.
Amazing, thank you. That's been really useful to hear the differences in the application processes between UK, Europe and US mainland. And I think I'm going to pass it on to Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really interesting. And so another question for all of you. Do you have any future plans or career paths in mind for when you finish your PhD?
Do you want to go the same order?
Yeah, go for it.
Personally, I have a pretty open mind about what I'm going to do. So my funding ends in around about May next year. I got a bit of an extension because of the pandemic. It should have been a bit sooner than that. And yeah, I'd quite like to go into science communication. I've also applied for funding to do a 3-year postdoc to stay in the same lab, kind of continuing what I've been doing. I'm also really interested in like science policy. I spent this summer doing an internship working on the intersections of Brexit and the space industry in the UK. So I've been looking at how Brexit kind of intertwined with the COVID-19 pandemic are going to impact the UK space sector and indeed the European space sector as well, because of supply chains and things like that. So I'm pretty interested in that, the kind of politics intersections with science and space. But having been a teacher, super interested in education too. And also, it's a flipping pandemic. Jobs are really hard to come by. So I'm kind of just going to apply for a lot of different things and see what comes come next summer. But I think that's what's great about a PhD. It gives you so many skills. I've had so many different opportunities, and just have an open mind. Don't feel like you're pigeonholing yourself, because you're totally not.
Yeah, so I guess my turn. So I don't really have any future plans yet, given that I still feel like I just started, even though it's been a year. It kind of feels like, still so far away. So I'm still not sure what I'm gonna do, but definitely I think that there is a myth that if you're doing a PhD, you necessarily have to continue in academia, and then if you haven't, you failed somehow. And I don't think it's true, because I see lots of people around me who finish their PhD and they continue doing something else that they're interested in and that they enjoy, and I don't know, and probably get paid for better. But the thing is just like, you know, there are really lots of options out there, and I quite like that in our institutes they also have lots of panels with people who have chosen different careers from the classic academia route, that they do like science communication, for example, and they do really encourage you to also look to these kind of paths. So I think that's quite nice, and truly you can do anything you want with a PhD, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to become a professor. But I would like to, I'm currently at an Arwen University, which, so like a very research intensive university. I would like to go to maybe a regional college or a liberal arts school, so smaller schools with less of an intense research focus, or work in a museum. I'm very interested in kind of museums and how museums interact with the public. So that's also something that I would really enjoy. But yeah, it's also a pandemic, so I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, yeah, it's definitely a difficult time to be looking for jobs, or even, I think the future is just very uncertain. And back to you, Katie.
Yeah, my next question for you all is, what have been the biggest challenges you face as transitioning into a full-time research position doing your PhD from your undergraduate degree?
So for me, the biggest challenge I've definitely faced is imposter syndrome. My undergrad degree was in astrophysics, and now my PhD is like mixture of geology, chemistry, physics, but very much centered around geoscience and geochemistry. And I, even now, you know, going into my 4th year, still feel like I don't belong, that there is so much I don't know, and that I'm a fraud, basically. And certainly in around about halfway through, probably my second into third, well, probably in my third year, in my second year, I had real mental health issues. I had to go through counselling with the university because I was just crippled with the sense that I was useless. Just because, and I think it's hard from undergrad, where you get scores. You're like, oh, I got this mark in this thing, so I'm doing well. no one else is doing your PhD project. You've got no one to compare yourself to know, like, as a benchmark, because you can't compare different research projects. And I was scared to tell my supervisor that I felt like I wasn't good enough, and I just kind of spiraled. And all I'd say is that is so common. And one thing, if you are looking at doing PhDs, ask the question about what provision there is for mental health support, because I was really lucky, and the university had a great counselling service that helped me out loads. And a lot of other colleagues in my year did the same with very similar things. So definitely imposter syndrome is real, and a lot of people face it, and you just have to understand that you were given, if you're given an offer, that's because they see the potential in you. And just because you don't know it all at the beginning doesn't mean you won't know the stuff by the end. Like, you're not expected to know your whole project on your first day, because then what's the point in spending 4 years or 7 years or 3 years doing it? So yeah, for me, it's definitely my own mind, essentially.
Yeah, so imposter syndrome it is something I think you have to learn how to kind of deal with, I guess, one way or the other. And to add to that, I guess for me, another aspect was that suddenly you do have to be just so much more independent in PhD. Like, there isn't a schedule, there isn't a timetable that you have to be at certain lectures at certain points. There isn't an exam that you would have to like prepare for. So especially, I think for me, here in Germany, sometimes I was a bit envious to my friends who stayed in UK, and they have like this report they have to produce by the end of first year that kind of is a summary of what you're going to do in your project, like literature review sort of thing. And here we don't even have that. So if I do not kind of put in the effort to learn these things, to find this information myself, then nobody will force me to, basically. And of course I will be getting nowhere. So that has been a bit of a challenge to kind of hold myself accountable, I guess. And also another aspect is that I learned that one supervisor might not always know all of the answers. So sometimes you do have to also have the initiative to perhaps ask someone else, or maybe just, I don't know, really spend more time trying to figuring something out, and, you know, be okay with that and understand that's fine. It's a learning process. But it is a bit scary at the beginning when you realize that perhaps you don't even have like such a readily available help source that will for sure know, like, there isn't necessarily always a defined path that you know you can follow. Sometimes you will find that, oh, perhaps that's actually impossible to do, I just don't know how to, and I have to find another way around this problem. So that's another thing that I found quite different from my master's, for example.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest problems for me was also imposter syndrome. I would say the first probably 2.5 years that I was in graduate school, I kind of just continuously thought that I wasn't good at what I did, that I wasn't going to be successful, that my advisor was going to try and kick me out. And it was really, really, really hard. And I'm like, still, I mean, I'm actively trying to deal with imposter syndrome, and I'm going into my 5th year. And then the other thing for me was, so I moved across the country, so it's about a 5-hour flight to see my family. And so being away from my family was very, very difficult for me. I grew up in like a very kind of pretty tight-knit family. And so only being able to see them twice a year was very hard.
Thank you. Thank you for all being so open. That should be really helpful for people considering PhDs and postgraduates, and knowing they wouldn't be alone in that situation. It's not uncommon. Thank you all for that.
So I will go with the next question. So you all kind of touched on imposter syndrome. And so did you ever feel that pursuing a career in academia or in STEM was more of a challenge because of your gender and because of the fact that you're women in STEM?
Yeah, absolutely. Spanning back to when I was probably about 15, 16, I was trying to decide what to do when I left high school. And I spent I did some time in a work experience, so like an unpaid internship in the summer, age 16, with an engineering firm who made like high pressure valves, and this company had 80 engineers and only one of them was a woman. And one day I was shadowing this guy and he turns to me, a 16-year-old, and he was probably like late 40s, and he was asking what was I doing there, and I said, oh, you know, I'm interested in being an engineer. I was trying to decide between that and physics at the time. And he said to me, but you're a woman, you should be a nurse. And yeah, you can kind of imagine that combined with the fact it was a company I was spending a week at which only had one woman there, and they were actually a student on a work placement in between their 3rd and 4th year of undergrad. So yeah, it really put me off, and actually that was why I ended up doing physics, because that same summer I went to a summer school run by a bunch of physicists, and loads of them were women who were amazing mentors to me and still are, and I still keep in touch with them. And I think it just really shows the power of how well you can be influenced by these things. And yeah, even that's really stuck with me. I'll never forget how I felt that day from that guy just saying to me, you're a woman, you should be a nurse. And I think things are improving. I think actually I'm annoyed that 16-year-old me wasn't the kind of outspoken feminist that I am now, because I think if it was now I would have probably punched him. Well, not punched him, but would have been mad. But at the time I was just really upset. So it does feel like there is this movement that is a lot more vocal now than there was. This was 12 years ago. So it feels like it's positive, but there are definitely still issues, particularly with like the more older generation of professors who think things are still very old school. And yeah, there's a long way to go, but things are getting better.
So I think I actually have gotten quite lucky, because for me personally, I never really experienced any kind of situations like the one just described. Well, of course, I think I just got very lucky, to be honest. And yeah, and I just had also great female role models, both back in Edinburgh and even here in the Institute as well. There are lots of, well, I guess maybe not lots, but there are these strong female scientists that I can really look up to and that inspire me and that I respect a lot. And that helped me lots in my work so far as well. So yeah, I just gotten really lucky, I think.
Yeah, so I've definitely experienced sexism throughout my scientific career. My undergraduate was very, very supportive and very they wanted their students to be successful. So I think I have a really good kind of ground layer for building on that. But yeah, there have definitely been instances where, you know, sexism has negatively impacted my career trajectory.
Yeah, I think that really helps shows how important it is that we do things like this to have have role models for young girls who are interested in STEM. So just going off that, who are your role models and who supported you and helped you get to where you are today?
So for me, there's a whole bunch, but the one who stands out, she's called Dr. Sheila Kanani. So she was my first mentor at that summer school I mentioned. It's called Space School UK. So I went to that at 16. I got a scholarship. It's like the UK's space camp, or just England's one anyway. And she was my mentor then, and at the time was doing a PhD looking at the Cassini mission to Saturn. And then after her PhD, she went on to be a teacher as well, and now she works for the Royal Astronomical Society as their education, outreach, diversity and equality officer. So she kind of spans a whole range of different things, and it's just been really helpful for me having someone who's a few years ahead of basically the same trajectory of teaching and a PhD, and sort of working in a thing that spans equality and diversity as well as kind of education and outreach. And I can't tell you how valuable it is for me to just message her being like, oh, this horrible thing just happened, be it bullying and harassment, or like at a conference, for example, or if it's just, oh, there's this job, should I apply? Like, I think it's really good to have someone who can kind of externally validate your ambitions. So sometimes I'll say to her, you know, I don't think I'm good enough for this, and she'll be able to say, no, but you've done this, this, and this. You totally can do that. I think it's so helpful. And if you don't have some sort of mentor in your life, I just would really recommend it. And please feel free to message me if you do want a hand with anything, because it's really valuable.
Yeah, so for me, I think also I have one person who stands out in terms of inspiration and support, and that was my master's project supervisor, Professor Catherine Hamans, back in Edinburgh. And yeah, I can't describe how valuable it really is to have that kind of support. And both academically, in terms of she pointed me to the PhD program that I'm actually part of right now. So she showed me that they were accepting applications. And of course, she helped me writing the application itself. She helped me to prepare a presentation for them. And she just continually supported me, just both academically and also just whenever I was struggling, I always knew that I could ask her for help, and she would share her own experiences from academia. And it always made me feel like then what I was experiencing was, you know, more kind of normal. And she would say, oh, don't worry, you know, it also happened to me like that time. And, you know, here I am now and everything's fine. You know, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. And you can do this. Yeah, so I'm very lucky to have her.
So I would say I had some really fantastic professors and undergraduate who just told me that I could do it, like told me that like I would be a good geology student, and then told me that I could go to graduate school and be successful. So I really appreciate those people, specifically my gap year mentor, Dr. Jackie Lee at U of M at University of Michigan, who gave me a job and then wrote me presumably strong letters of recommendation because I got into graduate school. So I really appreciate her. And then my mentors in graduate school, my advisors. And then I think probably the biggest of these people is my office mate / the research scientist in my lab group, Dr. Beth-Ann Bell, who is both a daily kind of encourages me and answers my science questions, and is just a very true good friend of mine, and a very good collaborator.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think you've definitely all emphasized the importance of mentorship and role models. So I think that's definitely really important and a good takeaway from this. And another question for you all is, why did you decide to do a PhD in your chosen field?
So for me, after my second year of teaching, I spent a week at a conference run by the European Space Agency at their base in the Netherlands. It's called ESTEC, and it was kind of let's get a load of European teachers together for a week and talk about the mission science that ESA is doing and figure out how we can get that into the classroom. And I really had a great time there, but the thing that really, the best part of it all was there's a guy called 𝗬𝗓𝗄𝗏, who is basically in charge of the kind of landing site decisions for the ESA ExoMars mission, which is a robot that's going to Mars, hopefully in 2 years' time. It's been a bit delayed. And he did this 1.5 hour keynote speech about how we decide where to go on Mars. And I just sat there thinking, gosh, I miss this. And I was kind of starting to get jealous that the kids I was teaching were learning new stuff when I wasn't, which sounds really weird. But it made me think, okay, I want to go back to university. I want to get back hands-on doing stuff. And that was what made me think I'll do a master's. But then I spoke to one of my old professors and he said, no, just go for a PhD. No point in spending a year doing a master's when you can just do a PhD. So that's why.
Yeah, so I kind of just, in general, I really enjoyed my degree for most parts of it. And I also, was really enjoying my master's project as well. And then it was I think it kind of came down to Catherine, my supervisor, because she just asked me one day, okay, Agne, so what do you want to do after you graduate? And then I was kind of a bit confused. I was like, And then she said, would you consider doing a PhD? And at first I was kind of not sure, because I thought that I didn't know if I was good enough, basically. And then it was Catherine who told me that, yeah, if you want to, you should just go for it. And then I think I did hear that also sentiment echoed a lot of times during interviews, that it's really about, if you want to do it, you should, and you can. And then I kind of started seeing it more as not some kind of, I don't know, test or a trial, but as an opportunity, just a chance to do what I want to do for 4 years, and to learn new things, and to just, see what I can create, I guess, during this time. So yeah, I guess that was it.
Yeah, so I came into geology pretty late. In the US, you can switch your major a lot in college. So I didn't get into geology until just after my second year. I took intro geology the summer between my second and third year. And I really enjoyed it. And so I was getting closer to graduating, and I just wanted to learn more, also be more marketable so I could get a job in the future. So I decided that I would like to go to graduate school, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to get a master's or a PhD at that point. So I applied to 6 PhD programs and 1 master's program. And I got into 3 of them, I think. And then with that, I kind of looked at the potential projects and the people I would be working with, and made the decision to pursue a PhD. Generally, I was very curious. I wanted to learn more and be able to get a job. And so that's why I decided to go to graduate school.
Amazing, thank you. So Anya, you quickly touched on there how your decision to go back into academia and how you're almost jealous of your pupils. How did you find that transition from teaching and being a high school teacher back to academia?
So it was quite a change, because you're literally going, as already mentioned, there's no time constraints. No one says you have to be there at this time, compared to teaching, where every part of my day, every day of every week was like, you're doing this class, or you're marking this, or you're writing this report. So it went from the most scheduled life to the most unscheduled life. But it suited me. I loved the flexibility. I was really glad I actually did a sort of different job in between my undergrad and my PhD. I don't think I would have had the kind of, I don't know, just the maturity and the kind of willpower, and also the self-confidence. When I did my undergrad degree, I had imposter syndrome, even worse, to be honest, back then. And then it was through teaching that I realized, I actually do know some things. So I really think I would have suffered even worse if I'd gone straight through. And it's also I treated a PhD like a full-time job. It is really quite, in my opinion, different to an undergrad. Like, you're being paid to do a research project, or in most parts you're being paid. People do them self-funded, but I felt that I had developed a sort of better professional kind of demeanor. I knew what my limits were, because when I was teaching, I really did push myself to the limits sometimes. So I knew how to spot the signs in myself mentally when things were getting bad, stress-wise, and was able to kind of stop them before they got too far. So yeah, it was a definite change in flexibility, but a good one. Big thing is, being a teacher, I did have a lot of holidays, and I earned a lot more. But to be honest, it's worth it for the fact I get to travel loads. My PhD, I've been to America a load of times. I went to Russia. I've been to the UAE. Like, okay, no one's done any traveling during the pandemic, so I did get lucky timing wise. So yeah, what I lost in holidays when I was teaching, I made up for in amazing research and conference trips, which obviously no one's doing at the moment, but at some point they'll get back to them, I'm sure.
Amazing, thank you for that. Elizabeth, I think you have a question now.
Yes. So a question for Agne. Do you have any tips for people who want to get involved in organizing science communication events like Astronomy on Tap? And could you actually mention what that is as well?
Right, so Astronomy on Tap is this kind of worldwide event that started in the US, I believe. And it's a science outreach event that happens usually in a local pub. And we just invite some astronomers to talk about their research. And we usually have 2 15-minute talks, and then we have lots of astronomy-related games and quizzes and things like that. So it's just kind of for people to engage with astronomy and for us to have fun as well. And if for people who want to engage in that, I would just say just do it. So for me, I kind of started doing it as a way of maybe becoming more part of the community of the city, and because I saw that there was kind of a lack of such events for international people. Even though Munich is quite an international city, a lot of the events are only in German, and that also means that a lot of staff, a lot of brilliant staff in our institutes that do not necessarily speak German also do not get that kind of exposure. So I just emailed the kind of main organizers of Astronomy on Tap. So there is like a team of kind of hub core people that handle all of the satellite locations. And then they said, yeah, so this is all of the information that we gathered, all the tips on how to do it. And then I just sent an email to students, and lots of people emailed back and were keen to join. And yeah, so I think it's actually a lot easier than you might think. So it is a lot of work, but it is very doable, and usually there are lots of enthusiastic people who would be willing to engage with your work. And I think so far from the events that we organized pre-pandemic, it also has been a lot of fun for all the people who come to just watch the talks as well. So it's very rewarding. It's not so impossible to do. It's a bit of work, but it's very fun. So I'd say just do it.
Great. Amazing. And now, Heather, how did you find the PhD format and environment in the US, and what did you find the benefits of it to be? I think your microphone.
Yeah. It's been 5 months. You'd think I would have figured that out by now. Yeah, so PhDs in the US are generally longer than they are elsewhere in the world. So typically someone who is coming in without a master's degree into an American PhD program in the geosciences or in the physical sciences takes between 4 and 6 years to finish the program. So our first 2 years are largely devoted to taking classes. So we take 2 years of classes, and then depending on your program, you'll either take a qualifying exam at the end of your first or your second year. If you pass that exam, then you're allowed to continue, and usually when you pass that exam and you complete your classes, you're awarded a master's degree. So you get a master's along the way. And then after that point, the rest of your degree is largely based on research. My school, UCLA, we have 2 qualifying exams. So we have one at the end of our second year, and then one about a year before we graduate. So I'll be taking my second exam next month, in about 1 month. So I guess the advantage to that is to be able to, specifically to the classes, is to be able to kind of like jump subfields a bit. There's a lot of students in my program have physics undergraduates, and then they come and they now study space physics, geophysics, atmospheric sciences, things like that. So it's nice to be able to get into the program and be able to learn stuff in a formal setting. The disadvantage is that it does take longer. So, a typical person graduates, if they come straight from their undergraduate, they'll graduate when they're 27 or 28 years old, which, depending on various factors, some people are happier with that than others. The other disadvantage is that if you come in with a master's, it doesn't necessarily mean that your program will be shorter. So, for example, my advisor she's from Korea, so she got her master's degree in Korea, and then she came to so 2-year master's in Korea, and then she came to the US and did a six-year PhD at Stanford. So in total, she was in graduate school for 8 years. So yeah, the timing can be a disadvantage. I'm happy that I am in a longer program. It's allowed me to also jump subfields within my degree. So I started studying tectonic geomorphology during my first year, and now I'm much more chemistry, like geochemistry focused. So I've enjoyed that component as well. And then just being able to explore subfields within my degree, kind of go off on like small little paths or little adventures within my research that if it had been a shorter time, I might not have been able to do that.
Great, thank you. And a question for Áine. Do you have any advice for people starting out their careers, and what do you wish that you knew before you started your PhD?
What would I wish for me, yeah?
Yes.
What do I wish? Advice: ask all the questions. I learned too late, I think, that you're not supposed to know everything when you start, and that it isn't that unusual to change fields, just like Heather said, and you aren't expected to know everything everyone talks about. So that a lot of my research is kind of global, because I need to use like super high-tech instruments that one's in DC and all over the place. So I'll go to these labs and they'll mention all these words, and I in my first year would just sort of listen and pretend and nod along like, yeah, I totally get what you mean, and then have absolutely no idea. And I'd have all these words written down, and who on earth knew what they meant? Not me. And then one of the PhD students in my group, who was a few years ahead, she was giving a talk a bit like this to a bunch of undergrads that I'd organised, and it was her that said, totally ask all the questions all the time. No one thinks you're stupid at all, because these people will have been, the right people you're working with, who've been doing it 10, 20, 30 years, and they just aren't going to know which terminology you don't know, especially if you've come from a different field. They're not going to know exactly what background you have, and it just looks so much better to actually just be honest and be like, oh, what does that word mean? And just, yeah, that's my absolute one advice, is just ask loads of questions. If you don't understand something, just say. It's so much quicker than spending weeks battling over something, and then you go to your supervisor and you're like, oh, I'm really stuck with this, I've been doing this for weeks, and she's just like, oh, you just need to do that. And if she told me that weeks ago, I would have been so much further ahead. So yeah, just be honest and ask questions, and it can be really scary, but if you've picked the right supervisor, and we've sort of talked about that already, if they're friendly and you've got a good response for them, chances are they're going to be much more responsive if you tell them. They're not mind readers. They can't tell you don't know.
Perfect, thank you, Áine. Agne, what were your greatest challenges from moving to a different country for your undergraduate degree and then for your PhD?
Right, so I think for my undergraduate, actually, it was not challenging at all. I don't know, I'm almost feels wrong to say, but I don't know, it was quite easy. But so I think it probably has to do with language, because moving to UK wasn't hard because I spoke English, so I felt kind of comfortable immediately. Whereas in Germany, it's just a lot of complications that arise if you can't speak the language. Like even just, you know, when I arrived here first day, I couldn't understand my Uber driver and I couldn't find them, and it was very stressful. And so just things like that. But of course, it is possible to learn a language, so it's really is not, you know, as bad as one might think. And our institute, for example, organizes language classes, so one can actually pick up kind of enough to at least be able to do your day-to-day kind of activities. And yeah, and I guess here the culture is also quite different, just in terms of like the shops are not open on Sundays and everything closes at 8. So it's kind of, but I think it does depend on the place a lot. So as I said, my moving to UK, no problem at all. Germany was I think it was just a lot more different from what I'm used to, and also the language barrier was a bit of a challenge too.
Thank you. And one question for Heather. What 3 key tips would you give to people applying for a PhD in the US?
So I would say, so as I've mentioned before, and as other panelists have said, make sure to reach out to faculty before you apply to the program, because, I mean, both in terms of time and because of how very, very expensive applying to graduate school in the US is, you don't want to waste that time and energy and money if you're, if there's no chance that you'll be accepted. Make sure that you have guarantees of funding for the duration of your program. So a typical PhD takes 5 years in the United States. And so you want to make sure that you have funding for that entire time, or at least some form of like, a letter might say you're guaranteed funding for this year, and then it'll be reassessed at the end of that year. But we guarantee that with satisfactory progress, you'll have funding for 5 years. And then also make sure to know what the typical summer funding situation is like. Some programs offer a stipend during the summer, some programs don't. So just make sure that you've talked to your potential advisor or program manager about the summer funding situation. And especially in places like Los Angeles that are very expensive, you want to make sure that you can survive on the stipend that is given to you. And the other thing is that healthcare in the United States is very, very, very expensive. So you want to make sure that your health insurance is covered, because that can also be very expensive. And then lastly, in the United States, you should never ever pay for a STEM PhD. So it shouldn't be self-funded. So just make sure that you're getting funding for it. And then lastly, just make sure that you talk to other students of the faculty mentor that you are considering working with. You'll be meeting with this person potentially, and they might seem completely normal and well-adjusted for the hour that you talk to them, but they could be really like a bad person. And so if you need to, you should always talk to their students or other students in the department about that person to make sure that it would be a good fit for you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Heather, and to all three of you. We're coming to the end of the hour, so I'm just going to very quickly open up questions to the floor. I saw some people put questions in the chat, so if anyone has any questions for our panelists, we want to put them in the chat and we can read them out. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Yeah, and but thank you to all three of you for speaking with us, and I think that's some really, really good advice, and yeah, so we appreciate it.
So we have one in the chat from Annie. Would you advise a break between undergrad/masters or just dive straight into a PhD?
So I would say I would advise a break. I think having some time to take a breath between undergraduate and a PhD is really important. A PhD is very intense, and undergraduate can be very, very intense. So you don't want to burn out after like 1 or 2 years of your PhD. So I think I stayed in research for that year, but I'm very happy that I took a break, was able to kind of step back, enjoy myself a little bit, and then I dove into a PhD.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. We have another question from Carol. Would it be bad to apply for a PhD just for the fun of it without having a clear career plan for it? So what do you guys have to say about that?
I think the main thing about PhDs is don't worry about not having a career plan, but definitely only do it if you really love and really sort of have enthusiasm and passion for the subject. It doesn't have to be the absolute, your goal for life, but it is really challenging and really self-directed, and especially at the time when you're writing up your thesis and things like that, to have that drive, believing in the subject that you're doing and in your project really helps, because you're not earning the same amount of money as you will as some of your colleagues who might have done other jobs after graduating will, and yeah, there are down times and it is hard. So I think unless you're really passionate about it, I wouldn't really recommend it too much, because just for how self-directed you have to be, there's no one else. It's your PhD, you're not doing it for somebody else. So doing it for the fun of it, literally because you love it, great. And don't worry about having a plan, because hardly anyone does. And even if people do, it normally changes anyway.
Perfect.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think we have time for one last question. So from Sarah, she's asked, what would you say to students with several different research interests? Is it possible to still change your research area after your PhD? So like, what flexibility is there in it between areas and things like that?
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I'm not sure after PhD how flexible it is. I guess it depends, but I would imagine it probably must be possible. Like, I can't see why not. But also sometimes you can also, like, so for me, I wasn't sure what area of observational cosmology I wanted to do my PhD in. And I kind of find a project with a supervisor that tailored it for me a little bit. And so in that way, I was actually able, so my current PhD is kind of in both of the areas that I was considering before. And the downside of that is that my supervisor might not necessarily have all the answers because he works in one of those areas. But I am very happy that I'm able to do both of those things. Or even you can perhaps look for some collaborations with people that are not in your group, but are also still in your institution that you could learn from, that you can make contacts with, and perhaps you could ask, you could even learn what the opportunities and options are in their groups as well, just during your time in the institution.
Yeah, I just echo that and say it is really flexible. I know someone who did a PhD in like planetary atmospheres and then did a postdoc for Cancer Research UK because it was just the same kind of data science and coding. It's very much a skills thing. STEM is inherently super interdisciplinary. So there are skills that I use that material scientists and engineers use. So yeah, people definitely move about within fields and out with fields as well. But really reflecting off what Agne said is also make it your own. You can collaborate, you can bring in other projects and tailor it yourself. Even if it's already got a description, it is so do with it what you want. And if you can bring in other of your passions, definitely do that.
Well, thank you very much. I think all your advice from today will have been really invaluable to everyone who's considering applying for PhDs or postgraduate events. And I'm sure if anyone has any more questions, our panelists wouldn't mind answering them if you want to contact them individually afterwards. So thank you very much for participating today, and I'll pass over to Edinburgh University Women in STEM to wrap it up.
Yeah, so thank you very much for everyone attending the panel, especially the panelists. Thank you 𝗬𝗵 and SWG for organising. And yeah, so follow us on our social medias, and we'll post this video up on YouTube later. And yeah, so the next event will be next week, and that will be the final event as well. And yeah, I hope this has been an insightful and informative event, and see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.